Hi, and welcome to He Has Answers, a completely free online ministry resource that, while still very much under construction, contains more than enough information to help you come to know the God who made you, knows you, loves you, and whom wants you to come and know Him so you may be saved and have everlasting life. In this series of videos, we'll be reading through a downloadable PDF file of an unfinished free ebook titled He Is, the Truth That God Exists, and the Thorough Investigation of Undeniable Proofs, so that you can see that beyond a reasonable doubt, God is real and the Holy Bible is His Word. If you'd like a copy of this PDF file for yourself, it can be downloaded here by right-clicking this link and saving the link as is in a folder on your own personal computer or even in your mobile device. Now let's begin. God, please give me a soft and humble heart as I listen. Please open my eyes and my ears and change my spirit so I may know you and worship you in spirit and in truth. Before we begin, because the most important decision in this mortal life is to know God, we'll spend a little time now so that time later won't be wasted. Reading through the following sections and honestly considering them with an open mind will help to ensure the remainder of this discussion is good and fruitful. It would, of course, be a great shame for you or anyone to work their way through this whole book, all the while denying or resisting every idea that is conveyed simply because they've entered into the discussion with that furrowed brow of argumentativeness we mentioned earlier. Hopefully the following will ready your mind so you may contemplate the truths herein properly. Absolute truth versus relativism. Friend, if I were to tell you adamantly that pralines and cream ice cream is the best ice cream ever created, would you by necessity have to agree? Would it be the truth for you? Of course not. It may in some respects be truth for me, but it wouldn't necessarily be truth for you if you didn't share that conviction. What about that little boy pretending to be Superman on his parents' roof? Would it hurt for him to jump off and fall to the hard and unforgiving concrete as gravity overcame his aspirations to fly? You bet it would. There's no working around it. That's truth. And it's absolute. In introducing that analogy to some while discussing the reality of absolute truth, I've had people inject that the boy was going to land on a trampoline or in a pool or on a pile of bagged lawn clippings. But that was never a part of the analogy. It was never a part of the reality the boy faced. Impacting upon the driveway was going to hurt, and that would have been the cold, hard truth, no pun intended. On the contrary, his truth that he could fly was never, ever truth. Furthermore, the law, or theory, of gravity states clearly that objects attract one another and it's directly proportional to their masses, hence why the small boy will plummet to the big earth. There's no workaround. That's fact. That's the truth. This, dear friend, is the vast difference between opinion, what flavor of ice cream is good, and fact, what is absolutely true. It is independent of anyone's opinion. It is because it absolutely is. This is what is known as objective truth. We must recognize that there are indeed absolute objective truths that are outside of the subject and their biases, interpretations, feelings, and imaginings. In our case, the subject being ourself. Consequently, in regards to the preference of ice cream, that's totally dependent on the subject, yourself, so you can determine whatever you want to be reality. Having said that, it's important though to recognize that this doesn't make it real reality, not even for yourself. The problem is that increasingly in the last couple of centuries, more and more people have been introduced to the false notion that everyone's truth, which as we've just covered is subjective, must be accepted as objective. More and more people are immediately responding with, quote, well, that may be true for you, but it's not true for me, unquote, when confronted with an assertion of absolute truth. This is in direct violation of reality. You might get away with saying that someone's truth about ice cream flavors has no bearing on you, but you won't get away with saying gravity has no bearing on you. Certainly not as you work at heights or rock climb or even walk down a set of stairs. That's because with the objective truth, you don't get to be the authority. Truth and reality are the authority. It is critical that you understand this. So for clarity's sake, it doesn't matter what we feel or think, absolute truth is not affected by us. It stands alone, unchanging and unshakable. It is we who must bow to it, for truth can never change and bow to us. The increasing attitude of personal truths ruling the day has eroded the reality of absolute truth so badly that in the summer of 1977, philosopher and pastor Dr. Francis Schaeffer coined the term true truth. It was in direct response to the total lack of respect the people of that generation had for the very word and idea of truth. He's alleged as saying, it was not a tautology, but a necessity to use the term true truth, meaning that it was not at all needless to essentially put the same word truth back to back. He was certainly right then, and based on the numerous conversations I've had with people in regards to truth and what it is a fair assessment that we have declined even further in our appreciation and understanding of truth. This train of thought in our society has led, of course, to the belief that there can be multiple absolute truths, and that they can and do coincide with one another, never conflicting, but being perfectly harmonious. This sort of idea demands, then, that there are distinct realities governing each of us in order for all subjective truth to be absolute truth. The problem with that, of course, is we all share the same reality, and thus the same absolute truth, whether we want to admit it or not. In spite of reality, this mistaken way of thinking allows for all personal truths and beliefs to be valid and for none to be wrong. This philosophy is what's known as pluralism. This, of course, runs contradictory to logic and rationale, and we will address this shortly. Nevertheless, this sort of thinking has been spread and continues to be spread rapidly through learning institutions such as schools, colleges, and universities, as well as through the media via movies, television, books, and magazines, and music. It is now very common to hear that objective truth does not exist, or at best, that it simply cannot be known. The foolishness of pluralism has led to relativism. Relativism is the idea that truth is determined relatively by a culture or society or historical context, and therefore truth, yet again, is not absolute, but ever-changing. Once more, we have a philosophy which, avoiding any pretext, seeks to undermine the authority of truth. Incredibly enough, as absurd as these philosophies are, they have become so prevalent in society that really, they serve more now as ideological systems which affect every aspect of our very lives. The prevalence of both of these systems in our world has resulted in people being clearly blinded from coming to the truth as they must know it. It should be clear that unintentionally or otherwise, people en masse are being conditioned through various means to be less and less comfortable with the reality of an exclusively correct version of the truth. Furthermore, those that hold fast to the reality of absolute truth are looked upon as narrow-minded, bigoted, and intolerant, and more are being pressured to stay quiet about their views. So once again, we have people as a whole, due to a fear of rejection, being set up to avoid or deny the absolute truth. What's inexplicable is that this is happening in the name of tolerance. Tolerance, by definition, means, quote, the ability or willingness to tolerate something, in particular, the existence of opinions or behavior that one does not necessarily agree with, end quote. There was once a time where we could peaceably say, "Oh, I believe firmly that I'm right and that you are wrong, and I refuse to embrace your idea. But let us agree to disagree and retain the right to voice our differing beliefs while continuing to treat each other respectfully." The irony, however, is that nowadays, those who most emphatically laud themselves as being on the side of tolerance are actually rabidly intolerant of any who speak anything that runs in opposition of their views. One of the ways this works itself out in our modern day society, as we briefly touched on in the welcome, is that there are actually laws as well as corporate policies being put in place restricting the ability for people like myself to lovingly tell others about God. Imagine that. Fortunately, I recognize that in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, I have the right to freely speak, I have the right to freely think, and I have the right to freely express my religious beliefs. And one of the greatest components of my relationship with God is that He calls me to share Him with others through action and words. No law or policy will ever stop that, especially not now while they contravene what the government has already decreed. Provided I'm respectful, gentle, and kind with my approach to the conversation, which God also asks of me, I can easily go on sharing, and no one has the legal right to stop me. But there are a vast many who, in the name of this counterfeit tolerance, seek to make freedom from religion the standing law in our society. They want to make it illegal for me to tell you about the God who made you and loves you and wants you to have eternal life. Just think about that for a moment. How backwards is that? How evil is that? Furthermore, they want to have pastors in the pulpits be monitored, censored, and even penalized whenever they speak something deemed intolerant, even when it's God who first said it and called us to say it too, out of love. Another massive shift in the idea of tolerance is that it's been perverted to mean all views are equally valuable, valid, viable, and true, and that we all must accept them as such, regardless of whether they completely conflict with what is absolutely true. All must approve, and those who do not are thus intolerant. The fact that nobody wants to be deemed as intolerant makes the view that there is no absolute truth and that truth is relative more palatable to the population. People would rather accept a philosophical lie than be labeled negatively. That's a big problem for truth, and this is a big problem for us. A final glaring fault with relativism and pluralism, which to me really puts the nail in the coffin for these nonsensical ideologies, is this stark reality. Two opposing truth claims cannot both be true. Often what advocates of relativism and pluralism demand be accepted as absolutely, quote, true for you and true for me, end quote, stand in direct contradiction with each other. And this breaks what is logically and very suitably known as the law of non-contradiction. The most relevant example to our conversation is the absolute truth that there is only one God. If it is true that there is only one God, then there cannot be multiple gods also. Moving on, if God has revealed Himself in a very specific way, and this is true, then it goes without saying that some alternative in another belief system cannot be true. You can't have two contradictory truths, or they are no longer true. All things can't be true. There's only one true truth. That's reality. That's the truth. That this may be deemed intolerant, even if by a majority, does not make it any less true. This is where objective truth meets subjective opinion. Again, we bow to the truth, not the other way around. Worse, though, is that proponents of relativism decry that truth is not absolute, thereby making an absolute claim. They wish to believe that their motto, so to speak, is objectively true, all the while denying the reality of objective truth. In this one instance, their stance is that the only absolute truth is that there is no absolute truth. Friend, I hope you see the ignorance and even the arrogance in this position. Not only is it a brazen attempt to buck the authority that truth has over our lives, but it also smacks in the face with what is known as a self-refuting claim. That means their idea defeats itself. If you have an absolute truth in one area, it demands absolute truth exists. And if an absolute exists, it by default extends over all things absolutely. So because truth is absolute, it is always absolutely true. Now, the idea that truth is absolute will of course require that morality is also absolute, but we'll be discussing this later on in the book. This, my friend, is an important topic to truly reflect on so that your mind will be ready for the remainder of our conversation. Is it evident to you now that tolerance does not render all beliefs as equal and valid because this defies non-contradiction? More importantly, is it becoming clear that the world system we live in seems adamant to erase absolute truth from its rightful place of authority over our lives? Do you recognize that you yourself must have your mind changed and accept absolute truth and its authority? If the existence of absolute truth is, as laid out clearly here, a logical and rational understanding of reality, why is this world system working so hard to deny it? Think about that for a moment, would you please? Now that you've pondered that a while, I'll finish with this. Because what is truly true is outside of ourselves and we cannot alter it, it has absolute and final authority. Similarly, God is outside of his creation. He is not a part of you or I, or the ground we walk on. He is separate and set apart, even though he is near to us in spirit. God is God, and like absolute truth, which does not bend to us or change for us, he does not bend to us or change for us. Like truth has authority over us, he deserves his rightful authority as well. In the welcome of this book, I talked about how knowing the truth would set you free. I talked of how knowing the truth and having freedom was having a personal relationship with God in order to have eternal life and freedom over eternal death. I also said this: it is important to know that we live in a world system where the truth of who God is and that you need him is attacked and concealed incessantly. Let what I said run over your mind a while, and then read the following. Jesus said to him, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. What's going through your mind right now? Are the dots being connected? Did you just experience a revelation within your mind? An epiphany? Has your mind been illuminated to the truth? Do you understand now why our world system, be it by accident or not, would work so hard to conceal and distort and alter what truth is so that it can never be truly received? Can you see now why relativism and pluralism and the idea that truth can't even be known rules the day? My friend, it is because the system we live in is working hard to attack who God is and keep you from knowing him and having eternal life and sharing him with others. I hope that the conclusion you have arrived at from this first segment of Before We Begin is that this will be a struggle, that you are indeed in a battle for your mind and your soul, and that it is not to be taken lightly. I also hope, my dear friend, that you understand why I am wanting so deeply for your success through this journey. You matter to me, but mostly, you matter to God. Thanks for listening to this video, and I hope that it blesses you. Please do share it with others so they may have the opportunity to understand this incredible truth. Be blessed.